Good evening, everyone. I'm Robert Hannon, and I'm fortunate enough to talk to my friend here, Brian, this evening, and I'd like to welcome you. As always, I have a couple of announcements. Many of you are repeat, so you'll know I'll ask about the phone. If you have them, could you silence them or put them on airplane mode? And I have some events taking place this week and one next month that I'm going to tell you about. Tomorrow night, as part of the Healthy Living series, Dr. Rommel Wren examines AI and early detection of cardiovascular diseases. On Wednesday, on the Discover Alaska series, Assistant Professor Tia Tidwell will talk about the relational responsibility to the land. And then on Thursday night, we have guests from the Fairbanks Summer Arts Festival performing at the Borgeson Botanical Garden. So that's something to look forward to as well. I've been asked to remind you, if you're not on the email list, that's easily done. You can go to the website and look for summer sessions. And also a new event, as if Michelle doesn't host enough. She's last minute. She has a new event taking place on August 11th here, and it's a discussion between Dermot Cole and Dan O'Neill.
Yeah.
So that should be something to look forward to. UAF acknowledges the Alaska Native Nations upon whose ancestral lands our campuses reside. The Trothiota campus is located on the ancestral lands of the Dene people of the lower Tanana River. And let me introduce you to Brian. He was born and raised in Washington, D.C. He earned his undergraduate degree at the University of California, Santa Cruz, and a master's at New York University. After writing and shooting images for East Coast weeklies in Baltimore, D.C., and Manhattan, he spotted a want ad that drew him north to the Frontiersman in Wasilla.
That's right.
Over the years, Brian has taken on field assignments and covered the legislature in Juneau for outlets ranging from the Fairbanks Daily News Miner and the Anchorage Daily News to Alaska's top television stations. And as we all know, as a musher, he's authored 2 books about his and his team's participation in the Iditarod and Yukon Quest sled dog races. More recently, Brian became Professor Emeritus, Mazel Tov, that's wonderful, from UAF after teaching journalism for nearly 20 years. Indeed, he and his investigative reporting students examined the innocence claims of Marvin Roberts, Eugene Vent, George Frese, and Kevin Pease, who were sentenced for the 1997 murder of John Hartman. Brian's book, just out in April, would you mind holding that up for me? The Fairbanks Four, Murder, Injustice, and the Birth of a Movement, tells the story of what their investigations found and the eventual freedom of the 4 men. Brian and his wife, Kate Ripley, another friend and wonderful journalist, have 3 adult children, Rory, Robin, and Rachel. Will you please welcome Brian O'Donoghue? Thank you. Now, Washington, D.C., what was it like growing up? And you're the oldest of 5, right?
I am, yeah. Wherever you grow up is normal, right?
Yeah.
And I would say that, more than anything else, I think our lives were influenced somewhat by my dad was a labor lawyer who at any moment was hopping on planes to go help settle strikes. And so we didn't see him a lot. And my mom kind of did all the house stuff and running you around, which with 5 kids, there's a lot of running around. But I think we had a very straightforward, being raised, and we all worked jobs every summer from the minute that we were eligible. Some trade job, boom, you're landing in it, and that was, I think, really good experience for what I've gone on to do in terms of being a reporter, and you just get to know people.
Well, I'm going to get to some of those jobs, or at least one of them for sure. But I'm wondering, since your dad was a labor attorney, is that where you got your sense both of social justice, would you say, and sort of your understanding of the legal system?
I think the legal system, yes, but social justice had more to do with, I grew up in the shadow of Vietnam, and D.C., what that meant is on weekends, a lot of the time, we're jumping on buses and going to demonstrations, and just the whole, and sometimes there's Vietnam veterans there as part of it, and it just, I think that whole environment more than anything else was really pretty, opened your eyes a lot.
Oh, I'll bet.
Yeah.
And I mean, being in Washington, D.C., is just to follow up quickly on that one. I mean, so much was happening in those protests. It's extraordinary how you could just go down and be a witness to that.
Well,
And be a participant.
It also was, let's admit it, it was pretty fun being in these big marches and being part of like these giant crowds and real rah-rah anti-war sentiments at the time, Yeah.
Your dad passed pretty early. He was 49 years old. You told me he had come out to see your graduation, and where were you when his health declined and passed eventually?
I envisioned myself being a war reporter and in particular a photojournalist, and I was in Egypt right then. I had a guy, and I forget his name was Hi Simon. He was an old photojournalist, and he said, go somewhere miserable and newsworthy. And the best I could come up with was Egypt and Israel were in the midst of peace negotiations. And I was there when I got the word that my dad had had a stroke. I think one of the repercussions of that, to some extent, was that I wound up doing more writing than I always took pictures, but I more and more gravitated towards writing because your pictures sold better with something, text, and there's more interesting things to bring in.
Yeah. Well, as the oldest, did you feel a particular weight, or were you expected to shoulder some of that?
All three of the boys, the three of us, all immediately thought we were going to have to take care of our mom. And she just let us know right away, like, hell no. you just do what you need to do, and leave the family to me. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I want to talk a minute about that photojournalism thing. Were you always attracted to visual storytelling?
Well, right from the very beginning, that kind of was my goal, and I imagined myself being Robert Capa, and that's really naive, in terms of war stuff, but at that age, you're not really intimidated by anything like that.
Right. Yeah. Well, you see some of these photos, and I'm sure about the peace talks between Egypt and Israel. That would be one of the where you see just a bank of lenses pointed at a signet. Do you have any stories from having to cover those sort of things that stick out for you?
I did run into an old photographer one time that was carrying ridiculously heavy, big lenses, cameras and lenses, and he just said, sometimes you need that to fight people off. I mean, that I thought was extreme, but
Right. Well, and here's another thing when you were talking about those jobs that you, one in particular, because I'd never heard this, you were a cargo ship wiper.
Yeah.
Windshields I've heard of, but wiping a cargo ship. Tell me about that.
Well, it's very self-descriptive, and wiper is a title in the Merchant Marine, and that also related to my dad's death. And we were at a memorial, and at that point I was probably 25 or so, 26 maybe, I don't know. And one of my dad's colleagues, labor colleagues, came up and told my mom, the worst thing that can happen is just let kids sit around dwelling on what's going on. And he said, you must have some kids that are seafaring age. And boom, like I think the next day or two we were down, my brother and I who were eligible were applying to ship out. And you don't know where you're going to go. You are guaranteed 6 months, at sea. And as a wiper, I wiped up everything that dripped in the engine room. And then this is like ecologically horrible. But I took all the old, the lighting as it burned out. We'd go up on deck and just like try to hit things using it as spears. We tossed everything overboard. Every bit of trash all got tossed overboard. And my voyage went from here to India, up and down both sides, and then back. And it was tremendous and eye-opening, and I might have stuck with that, except for, and I think I let you know what happened to my brother.
Yeah, tell me about that.
My brother Coleman, 2 years younger than me, shipped out on what turned out to be more of a World War II surplus freighter. And it's called the SS Poet. And remember that name, SS Poet, and look it up. Look up what happened to the SS Poet. And basically, he went on one little trip. He wasn't up with his time completely yet, but he happened to pull into Philadelphia where his girlfriend lived. She persuaded him to jump ship, which is a big no-no in the Merchant Marine. And he did. And the Poet, within the next 48 hours, was hit by a freak wave off the East Coast and lost with all hands. And that is the only non-wartime disaster like that in the last century.
Wow.
But they figured, and the theory was that it's an old rust bucket, and if it wasn't loaded properly, that it hit a wave, and the wave suddenly flipped the boat and caught everyone and took them down.
Wow.
No warning.
What is your brother's motto?
Know when to get off the boat. and he lives by that, Yeah.
Well, as long as you mentioned India, I want to jump ahead a number of years because you went back to India with Kate and your daughter, I believe, and under very different as a Fulbright scholar, right?
Fulbright scholar, but also supported by Indian colleagues here at the university. They sort of pointed out where it would be good to go and lined up a great teaching gig for me in Pune, India, and it was a great year, and really all the kids became braver, just getting exposed at that time of your life. I think the youngest was probably 5, my youngest sister, and that was a great experience, and
I'll bet, and quite an honor.
Yeah.
Well, all right, let's get you to your master's, which I understand you had to be browbeaten to enter NYU?
Well, I had a close friend's older sister was an executive at NYU, and I was in New York trying to make it as a reporter, photographer, and basically my biggest edge was a motorcycle, which I could use to bust through traffic and get covering news, anyway, she basically persuaded me to go to NYU. This is Billy's older sister, and she between her and also my grandmother helped me out financially some. I was able to do journalism school there on the side while I was also doing news stuff, and that was a great whole combination.
Yeah, tell me. So you were a broadcast major, weren't you, or you got your master's in broadcast?
No, I got my master's in broadcast because I didn't know anything about it, and I felt like I knew about reporting and photography, and it just sounded like that was something else good to broaden your skills.
Yeah. Was it useful for you? I mentioned to you, I think I worked with John McWhorter, and of course he had his master's, but he said the best thing on it was you had great editors.
Well, I think as any person who's worked in a newsroom, you realize the value of editors, you know, and editors are they can be a pain in the ass, but good ones are worth it, you know, you know, yeah. I never did work in, I worked in TV for, I think, 2 years, and my main accomplishment was there was a rival reporter who had replaced me at the Newsminer, and on the floor of the legislature in Juneau, I popped the question.
Okay, let's get to it. We had to talk because it made national news.
It did. It got more coverage than anything else I will ever do in my entire life. You know, and I just turned the TV camera on when I walked out to do this.
Hold on. Let's set the scene a little bit here. Yeah. So Kate Ripley's also covering the legislature.
Yes, indeed.
All right. And so this is where you proposed to her, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I got down on my knees and I proposed, and all of this was under strict arrangements with Ramona Barnes, who, when I told her what I was going to do, and she just glared at me for a moment, and she says, "Well, I like Kate, so here's how you're going to do it, and here's when you're going to do it." You know, a
lot of people have wedding planners. Not always have Ramona Barnes.
No. And what was really, though, I'm trying to remember who it was, but someone from the rival party jumped up as soon as it was over and said, "Well, at least there's one good thing we accomplished this this session," you know, and you know, that was a great comeback, you know, for them. Yeah, gotta appreciate
all right.
that.
Well, I want to get you to Alaska. You're
Yes.
working on an East Coast weekly.
Yeah.
When you see an ad, right? Tell me about that.
I saw an ad for the Frontiersman, an editor and publisher, and I just, you know, I don't know. I was a little sick of the city at that point, and I called the editor, Shelley Gill, and I said, "Well, you know, tell me about the place, you know what?" And she's like, "Oh, it's booming, it's this and that, you know, and everything." And I said, "Well, is there any mountains around there?" She said, "We have mountains in our masthead," which, what a paper, you know, yeah. And I still think that the funnest time I ever had as a journalist was 2 years in Wasilla working for the Frontiersman, and you know, that's where I was introduced to sled dog racing. That's where I was introduced to the mountain climbing. You know, you know, I'm not a mountain climber, but as a covering a group doing it once, Doug Eating, an amazing pilot, flew us up onto one of the edges of snow up on top of McKinley, and I got out and took pictures of the climbers getting ready to go do it, and then jumped back in the plane, and he literally just let the plane slide backwards and fall off the mountain, and then turn around, and he's just one of the great, you know, Denali pilots, you know, and yeah. But Talkeetna, you know, is such a fun town. I covered that a lot, and the Valley just had endless stories. Of course, the Reddingtons, you know, and that was a whole big thing. And I did get dragged into sled dog racing.
Yeah, well, and we'll touch on that in a second here. But so, and that's where you met Tim Mowry?
The Mouth.
Yeah,
yes.
and you guys pals and roommates, and
yeah.
And so when you came up to the Newsminer, did he follow you? How did that work?
No. He was a farm boy that was just escaping the farm, and both happened to, you know, fixate on the Frontiersman, and he was a sports writer, and we, you know, shared a cabin, and have been, you know, pretty much lifelong friends, and you know.
Well, one of the best titles I've ever heard of was "My Lead Dog Was a Lesbian," and my favorite story from that is the time that you tried to thaw your Scirocco. Do you want to talk a little bit? Because that also became quite well known.
You know, I don't really.
No, you don't want to. Right.
I don't know. It's just, you know, a lot of stuff, you know, can freeze, and you know, Yeah.
Well, both books of yours about mushing are wonderful, of course. But
They both boil down to how to lose a race.
Yeah, well,
I mean, let's be fair.
I didn't want to say it, Red Lantern, but
Yes,
yeah.
yeah.
But which is kind of like a badge of honor.
Well, I know that how many people I beat in each race, in the sense of you're falling behind and then continuing and then having, at a certain point in each race, when I passed a person, they were gone. They were not going to succeed. And I am very opposed to some of the newer rules that try to artificially, force teams to go. I mean, you should go at the pace that is best for your dog team. And that should be the focus is dog care, and that's what Reddington believed, but there's a lot of emphasis now on, if you're out of the front runners pack, just whack them off, and because the officials who are just recruited to, a lot of times they have little affiliation with the sport, but it's a kind of thing that they enjoy or want to get back home, and the reality is on these races, the locals can take over as checkers for the people in the back and are perfectly happy to do it. And when you arrive in a village, I mean, people pour out regardless of what place you're in and stuff. And it's a really respected whole thing in the villages where the race routes go.
Sure. Well, so you don't have a team any longer, right?
No.
Yeah. Do you miss it?
Oh, it was a good part of my life when it was. I'm glad at those kind of things I got to do. I'm realistic I'm lucky not to hurt myself in any given week. It feels like, No, I'm happy to have watched that and been part of it.
Well, let's move into the Hartman case and the origins of what would eventually be the exoneration, but also your book, The Fairbanks Four. You knew some of the people involved in that, right, when it was first reported?
I had been a Fairbanks reporter for quite a while, and I certainly had some encounters with the police department, and I knew some of the officers that were figuring prominently in the thing. And at the News Monitor, people had certain beats, and my beat was never specifically police, but on a Saturday, or you fill in for someone else, we also my wife and I also knew Hartman's family a little bit. We'd had some interactions and
well, that's through the race, right? Through dog mushing.
His mom was running the Quest store here in town,
right?
And so we'd had a lot of contact with her before, and then I was aware that it was a family facing hard times in a lot of respects, a single mom and 4 boys, and certainly the crime was a tragedy.
Oh.
And what does come about around what we're talking about is I think it was fall of 2001. There's an opening at the university, and it's not something...
Well, hold on a second, though, before you get to the university, because you write about this, that you're editorial page editor, right?
I was editorial page editor.
And I from your book, I get that that's when you started beginning to wonder.
Well, it is true. There was a letter writer, in particular, Curtis Summers, that like clockwork, and I can't remember now if you were allowed, Kate and I were just discussing this, I thought you were allowed like 1 letter every 10 days or 2 weeks. Kate's pretty sure it was 1 letter a month. But anyway, he, is it 1 letter?
Yes, 1 letter.
Okay, we got people here. No. All right, like clockwork, he kept asking questions about the Hartman case, and just asking questions about police work, and we publishing them, and that starts to perk your curiosity, and I wasn't covering that story. When I
I think it's interesting, though, Brian,
Yeah.
that as an editorial page editor, you would try to find out back up some of the facts. So you would go on your lunch break to the courthouse and look
Yeah.
some of this material up.
Well, and I tried to fact check other letters too, to the extent that they begged it, and this was pretty serious, and he was raising really specific, complaints, I was looking into that on the side, and talking to others in the newsroom about it. But police reporters, if I found something, I would tell them, anyway. Yeah.
Well, anyway, I just want to point that out because you can see how this might naturally lead into when you become a professor here, that kind of responsibility to the facts and to the case that is a case. So let's get you to the university. Charles Mason kind of...
He recruited me, and I could never have... I really appreciate all the things that opened up. And I was not real excited about it, and Kate just really pointed out she thought it would be better for our young family. The hours as a reporter are very unpredictable and other stuff. What was pretty amazing is early on, UAF's a research institution, and so I'm starting to get pressure. What is your area of research? People wanted me to define my area of research, and I'm like, well, how about if I look back at this case? It was very controversial, and some people advised me against it, and I'm just like, no. If I'm going to look at something, I want to, because there was, right from the very beginning, Marvin Roberts, once you look at it at all, he had alibis. And this is the kid who owned a car. The crime required a car. Nobody else in his group had access to something like that. And so in the very least, you got to check out his alibis. And then the other thing that suddenly I was realizing as a professor, I had a whole newsroom. I had a whole team of reporters that in my journalism classes, I could certainly legitimately send them out to the courthouse or anywhere else, and we actually pretty soon got to the point where there was a lot and so many questions. We thought we need to track down all the jurors and ask them what made you vote to convict. And there had been 3 separate trials because the police, and then I also ran this by others in the investigative reporting ranks, they split it up into several trials because they expected that one or another would turn against the others. This always happens, supposedly, when there's a group of kids and there's, actually been, a real crime. One will flip against the others for a lesser sentence. That didn't happen with the Fairbanks Four, and that was flagged as a big outlier. That is just not normal. And, so I started digging into the case, and my students, we hit a point, and I think it's in the very first year, that we wanted to figure out why did jurors convict. And so we started tracking down jurors, my students were going out and interviewing jurors. And one of the jurors says, "Did anyone tell you about our experiment?" And they were stuck and couldn't agree during deliberations, this one particular jury. And so they all went outside, with the guard let them out of the courthouse, and they were in the middle of deliberations. They'd been stuck for a couple days, and they were getting grumpy, and so he let them outside for a little bit. And they started pacing off distances and eyeballing things and trying to decide if what the star witness had claimed to see was possible. But what they were doing was in the daytime, at unknown distances, trying to recognize each other when they've been sitting together in a box for, days. And when my students stumbled across that, I started asking, others about it, and they just said, hell no, that's not normal. And this folks in investigative reporters and editors, which I had gone to their conference because of the support of the university.
Yeah, I want to break this out a little bit, if you don't mind,
Sure.
to kind of help with this, because before we get to that organization that played, it seemed like an important role, how would you have semester after semester after semester of cohorts of students.
Yeah.
How did you organize the material so one cohort could pick up what the previous one had discovered and take it further?
Okay, there's two different aspects to that. One is that I had some students that were continuing into a different course that I'm also teaching, and already have the background. And then the other aspect of this is that, in my semesters, the summertime, things like that, I'm coming up with questions and things we need to pursue the next time, and what am I going to be able to do with this group the next time? And also over time, it became more and more known within the department, at least, in the college maybe, that students were seeking me out to be part of it, and when they heard about it, they also sometimes were seeking me out, and a lot of our sources, were folks that had relatives living out in the villages, it just was a lot of families who were associated with the Four were very, appreciative of what we're doing, and we're suggesting who we should talk to, and we're, arranging for us to meet someone out in, McGrath,
It was amazing. I just have to say, one was an ex-military policeman, and it was remarkable in your book how they would bring their expertise to the plate or to the project.
Well, part of this is UAF is, I think, unique in the span of students that we get. With, and I did have students that were retired, that were doing something as a personal enrichment. I had students that, had just been military. You have folks from all kinds of, with more life experience, say, than the person traditionally marching straight through school. And I felt that I had that a little bit too, in the sense of,
Well, your rich background, bringing that to...
rich,
Hey, I would say Wiper's a pretty good resume thing,
When I walked out of the newsroom, my face would be black, and my orders would be, don't bump into anybody, because you're so covered with soot.
Okay.
That, and once or twice, there's a situation where someone, I was on a shore or something, and someone pushes me aside, and their whole arm is black with soot and stuff, and it's not my fault, I tried to stay out of the way.
But so you have a rich body of students and it's remarkable how many leads you track down. Some are false, some are very fruitful and lead somewhere. Now let's go back to this organization that was a resource for you.
Investigative reporters and editors is just the top reporters from all different branches nationwide, and they're serious, hardcore reporters. The Sneddon Chair was developed in the period of time that I was teaching at the News Monitor. When I was teaching at UAF, and I recruited a lot of different folks that I met at conferences to come up and spend either like a couple weeks with the school or sometimes, a semester,
Right.
And that also was really inspiring for everybody and brought in a lot of ideas I am very beholden to UAF for making that opportunity available,
But through that organization and the Innocence Project, talk
Yeah.
about the Innocence Project.
Okay, the Innocence Project, they come in. Okay, the crime takes place in '97. I started teaching in about 2001, maybe 2002. The department is not oriented towards this stuff at that point. I get to go to IRE pretty early and start making contacts and networking through them. They listen to what I'm working on. They give me ideas of what we could try, and all of that was just a really very productive, ongoing relationship.
Well, and that's what conferences are supposed to do for.
I mean, that was awesome.
Okay, go on.
Yeah. Well, anyway, some of them had different ideas. Some of them had, at one point, Gary Cohen, who's just a remarkable, I think, 2 or 3 time Pulitzer winner. He is no longer with us, but just a great human being. He urged me to give the 4 who were in prison at that point lie detector tests, arranged for it. And I looked into it, and it was just going to be unbelievable hassle to try to get permission to go in there with a bona fide lie detector expert and all of this. And this was in a period of time that they happened to be housed. I think 3 out of 4 of them were available. And I told him, I just can't do that. I just can't do that. And he said, well, I understand it, but you'd want to know, wouldn't you? You'd want to know if they're telling the truth. And that was I couldn't pursue what he was, but he was really heartfelt, and he's just like, that's what I would want to do. He worked for like Chicago, and had all kinds of assets, and I'm just like, we can't do that. What I was able to do is, and this was the first thing that really got everything cooking, is I took a full class in to interview Marvin Roberts, and we videotaped the whole thing, and we were there for hours in the jail, and he just laid things out, and that's what really got us going, and we started check everything he told us checked out, and one by one you start looking at things.
Yeah. And I may be jumping ahead a little bit with the book, because you're challenged as the author, of course, but also you're dealing with 2 time frames here. You have the event, the investigation, and the trials and whatnot.
Yeah.
You're picking it up several years later, but then these guys are moved out of state, and there are all sorts of impediments to your investigations that occur over time.
Yeah, well, that's just, you try to, once you establish that one or more are innocent, and over time it became more and more likely that all of them were innocent. I mean, 2 of them had been so drunk that they just didn't even know hardly where they were at the moment that they're being interrogated by police. And one of them, 17 years old at the time, is being awakened up between interrogations, and he eventually says, well, I must have been there, So the police are left thinking they have 2 confessions. George Frese was also so drunk that he had no idea where he had been or what he'd done. He was the oldest at 20 years old, but when we looked into things, it seemed more and more likely that Vent was innocent, and Frese, hard to know, and Kevin Pease had alibis, but he also was a known, hard case and had a long police record, and so they just scooped him up in the. But anyway, once you start identifying that people are innocent, you can't really turn away. And I happened to be in the kind of job where I could continue to pursue this, and at a certain point, it turns out later that one of the actual killers had confessed, and before that I published. Before that, I did the longest series in the history of the News Miner for free, gratis, as a outside contributor, and they had faith in me, and that was called Decade of Doubt, and that essentially reopened the case, because what it really pointed to, we couldn't answer who did it, but we made the case for why these guys were innocent.
Right.
And that was the longest series, like I say, in the history of the News Miner, and took a lot of guts by the editor, Kelly Boston, to publish it, and really appreciated that.
Well, let's jump ahead a little bit on that. So eventually hearings take place to determine whether anything. Talk us through those hearings, because that's a big portion of your book, is that it's tension that builds.
It's the end stretch. It is a remarkable, unprecedented for Alaska hearing on the valid convictions versus proof of actual innocence. And that's a really difficult legal hurdle to jump. And at this point, three different juries, weighing charges against the different ones, had all come to guilty, and sentencing had happened, and you're trying to overturn convictions. And this is really before DNA and things like that were proving to be, open up a lot of eyes in terms of false prosecutions and wrongful, judgments. And now here though is also something about Alaska that I didn't go into a lot of detail with this in the book, but it's a small community relatively in terms of professions, and a person works for the prosecution for a while, a person works for the defense, more so in this town than most places. And I think that there was some fair understanding amongst at least part of the legal profession up here that these guys were innocent, if not all of them, but some of them. And the Innocence Project, I think, was operating on some intel about that when they came to the rescue, in the sense of mounting an actual case to challenge the verdicts. And Bill Oberle and I worked very, very carefully together for...
he's the attorney that heads that
He is
up.
the attorney that headed the Alaska Innocence Project at the time. This was their first real case, and it played out over... he eventually, I think it took about 2 or 3 years, and then he won approval for a 5-week, Judge Lyle agreed to conduct a hearing on the case for actual innocence. And that played out over 5 weeks. And what that was tremendous for in terms of being a writer or a reporter or just someone who cares about justice is, under oath, a number of people called changed their stories. When because the penalties of perjury are pretty sharp. So you got people admitting that, well, they didn't really know this, or, well, that's what they thought, or that's what they heard, or, but I mean, they really came clean, in terms of whether or not they could stand up for what they had testified about earlier. And somewhat, I've always had mixed feelings about this, but this in 2015, the state suddenly swooped in, and Marvin Roberts had served his full time. He'd been out for a little while. He'd been the scholar student. He had, anyway, he got out. He'd served his full, and he was on parole, and he was. The state suddenly pressed, and Judge Lyle had just announced that he'd finished his hearing, and it was but he couldn't tell how long it was going to take to render a verdict. Right. And he said it was going to take as long as it needed to for him to go through every possible, aspect of this, and he was not going to be limited even by the normal thing that what. Does everybody know what it is that causes a judge to usually issue an actual final judgment? There's a time clock. Yes, and if they exceed the time clock, their pay gets cut off, and various other kinds of loser parking. That's what. And Lyle had announced that he didn't care about the clock. It's gonna take as long as it, and that suddenly sent a shockwave through the others that were still in jail, and I remember trying to argue Marvin not to agree to the state's settlement. Was everybody gets out, charges are erased. It's as if this never happened. No compensation, no acknowledgement of error, anything like this, and I was urging Marvin not to give in to this, because it was all or none. I mean, they were forcing him to give up his right to seek justice, and he said, "I can't leave him in there." I mean, they could die any day, and most were in prisons outside at that point, no, they were all back here because of the hearings, and anyway, so 2015 is when that came, that got them all out, and I think that it's pretty tough to adjust to life, after being in jail so long, and
yeah,
I mean,
and also, but one of the points that really comes across is that these prosecutors who are still arguing the case, but it's clear much of this is tainted, and they have a guy who's committed, there's strong evidence that links him, and yet they continue to press and press.
I think it, this is where I wish my dad had been around and I could talk to him about this. My dad was a lawyer, my grandfather was a lawyer, and it definitely, has been sad for me to view what Alaska's law department to this day continues to assert, which is that they're lucky they got out, and I don't understand that.
Well, and okay, let's go. I want to turn to your book now and writing the book, but it's safe to say the ramifications from that botched thing continue to play out. The Fairbanks City Council trying to figure out how it's going to pay for the settlement.
I've been in Fairbanks a long time. How many people believe that this will go smoothly in terms of...
Well, that's a good point.
It's a three-part settlement, three big chunks, and I hope to hell they collect what they're supposed to collect.
All right, let's talk about the book itself, because, writing about a race, there's a beginning, there's an end, and you get from A to B.
Yeah.
Not as straightforward for this book, was it?
No, and my ending, I think, captures more the spirit of Marvin Roberts and what he feels proud of accomplishing. It has been.
Well, tell me as you know, writing is condensing, tossing out.
Yeah.
But you have mounds of information.
Okay, but
And-
I also, every once in a while, I got to check the book to see if this is in it and made it to the final cut, because things do change and things do get shortened. I do think the publisher did a great job of the presentation, because a lot of what I did in this is, it was a situation where you're constantly changing your assumptions. You learn something new and it causes something else to be in a different light. And I had this, at one point I thought of titling the book Rewind, because I jump back sometimes.
And your chapter headings have that rewind, because then you go back to it.
I did put it into the chapter.
Yeah, a little like.
But what I mean is I think the publisher did a really good job of distinguishing between signaling with kind of even just the way you do text that there's a little change coming, or that the dates, pay attention to the dates here. And I don't know if everybody's going to like it. I know that it violates a lot of rules in terms of names. You're not supposed to have like 30 names of different, students or this or that.
Yeah, you have a huge cast of characters.
And what's really funny too is Alaska, you get a lot of repetitive names. First names or something or I guess it happens anywhere. What name was popular the year that people were born or something, But I think some people struggle with keeping track. I've tried to map it out as well as I can, but
Well, I have to say, again, I can see why you'd be a great professor, because you obviously care about these students and you want to honor the work that they, contributed to this project.
Oh, yeah.
And so I think it's wholly commendable on that regard. But also, I have to ask you, just how did you sift through it, though, Brian? Because you don't have a straight chronology. You can say on day one, blah, 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 this happened, do and follow it through. But as you just pointed out, it's revised maybe that didn't happen.
Well, I had a whole lot of time to work on it.
Yeah, I guess about 10 years. But were publishers reluctant when you came up to it to handle the material?
All I can tell you is that, I did turn it into places and it got rejected, different versions. I have the world's greatest literary agent. She is one of the very first in the business. Her name is Jane Distel, and I happened to get her as a literary agent for my lead dog was a lesbian, because my buddy had, who's a more serious writer, had a couple books with her, and she stuck by me, and at a certain point, she went out and just, I think, raised hell until the Sourcebooks bought it,
Well, there's always a worry, I think, for publishers, especially today. We're such a litigious culture.
Yes.
They're afraid they're going to expose themselves to lawsuits.
Well, and there have been people that were upset at different times over parts of the book or parts of things I published otherwise. Nearly the book draws a lot from the down the stretch reporting that we did that was published by the Newsminer, and as a very special whole deal, and every student who contributed to each story was acknowledged by name, and it was all under my byline, just because they felt uncomfortable publishing something so serious written by students. You can't really, but everybody got credit for what they did, and the Newsminer publishing that was, really, and that was that Decade of Doubt series, which reopened the case, and then down the very stretch as the things were playing out in court, I was sidelined in part because they called me as a witness, the state, and just deliberately set me. I couldn't come in the courtroom, and so I had students covering that, and I was allowed to go to the courthouse and take what they had, done, and we found ways to publicize that. I don't know. It was.
Well, how's the book been received? Are you getting feedback?
I think I'm getting fair reviews. Every once in a while, a person will indicate the book's a mess and they can't even begin to digest it. And then others seem to be really pretty caught up in it and like the organization. And I would say that more reviews seem positive and the negative, and it seems to be doing pretty good.
Yeah.
It came out in April, so we're still kind of early
days,
stages
right?
to see what happens.
And how are the Fairbanks Four feeling about it?
I'm more in touch with Marvin than anyone else. Eugene, a fair amount as well. I think. They're moving on with life, and that's good. And Marvin certainly was kicking up his heels recently, gloating about the settlement that he received. And he recently received the contract is for him to receive $11 million. And one of the things I was going to put in the slides was he sent me that generation communicates the way you would think, texts and email, and I got a little text that said, better ending for your book. $11 million.
I just want to acknowledge that you've won a host of acknowledgments, awards, and just kudos for your work on this project.
What someone once told me about reporters is that the great thing about reporters is like you give them a little trinket and they'll just work their ass off. That's why they give each other these little medals and they give each other these little,
Yeah, you got a little bit more than a
little
few
ribbons
trinkets. Yeah.
Well,
but I'm interested in you. You've worked on this book for a long, long time. It's out now.
Yeah.
What's ahead for you? Is there a sort of postpartum depression period?
No depression. I'm relieved. But I think it's probably my last hurrah. I can't imagine anything like this again. All my kids, I'm sure consider me an absent father during certain points of it. I am beholden forever for the killer who confessed to a prison guard, and we found out the truth, because what was hanging there for a number of years is, okay, these guys are innocent. Who the hell did it? And it turned out to be some local gangbangers that had grown up here in Fairbanks, and one of them is a real head case. And he had been involved in they were involved in some previous murder, sort of drug murder thing. And nice. He was known for stomping people in the head. And that is police and others told me that is very unusual. And it is, and that is also how John Hartman was killed. He was stomped in the head,
But the case remains open.
That'd be a question for the law department,
Yeah, well, I'm not asking, yeah.
Yeah, I think they'd say, as far as they're concerned, there's still convictions,
Yeah.
And I don't know that Lyle, I don't know if he, I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know if he actually was able to erase the convictions or he was preempted by the settlement, and that would be a technical, aspect of things.
Well, about this time, Brian, we open it up to questions from the audience. I think they may have a few.
I'd be happy, yes.
Yeah. All right.
How much do you think racism played in this?
Racism.
Well, let me put it to you this way. Do you think there's any chance in hell that 4 white kids from middle-class families would have ever faced this? Perhaps they might have been arrested, but it wouldn't have dragged on like this. I think the the evidence of innocence at a certain point was really clear, and certainly when you got others confessing, and yet the state fought that. I'm shocked, and I think that is racist, and I think that is undeniable, and I'm sad. Yeah.
And also, Curtis Summer, if he hadn't been writing those letters.
Yeah.
Yes, I can't overestimate how important that was in terms of focusing my attention on it and the questions he would keep raising. I am very grateful, though, that I ended up at the university where I could put in the time to pursue that, But it took too long. I feel bad how long it took us,
Well, the validity of real journalism today, too, it just seems like this shows the importance of journalism.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Thank you.
I mean, only a few organizations left standing would have the resources, time, and personnel to throw a question like this. You think of the biggest one, like New York Times and whatnot. But local journalism, small town papers are on the ropes.
I think that, the Newsminer's staffing is like maybe a third of what it was when I worked there, what we're losing with, social media is tremendous in terms of sharing information, but there's no fact check, there's no real obligation on and news media was focused on the truth and is focused on the truth, but it's gutted everywhere, and I really worry about that,
We don't really have statewide news in Alaska, it feels like. We don't have it.
You get a sprinkling of it. The Newsminer only has so many pages. The Alaska, there's some nonprofits that are pretty good. Alaska Beacon is one. Yeah, Sean?
Sean?
I just want to say, Brian is very modest, but, this became the trial of the century for Alaska.
Yeah.
And without Brian, I don't think any of this would happen. Because, they confessed. And I remember even personally, when it was like, oh, they confessed.
Yeah.
And it took, somebody to dig and dig and dig. And
Yeah.
Brian didn't tell this story, but it was so dramatic. He took his class down to where this one eyewitness said he witnessed these 4 guys from, I can't remember, but it turned out, Brian, they paced it off. It was like 2 football fields at night.
Yeah.
And it was like, and he was, so.
We actually did this like many times after that. I'd bring
So
my...
maybe people didn't hear Sean's point,
Well-
but his point is, though, that your efforts really are incredibly important to seeing this correction of an injustice, and that you and your class would pace out the distance that you talked about earlier.
It was one of the first things we do after the first or second time we did this. I'd bring students out early on, and at night, which is when the timing is, because the jurors, when they went out, and they weren't supposed to go outside, they went out during the middle of a day, to kind of eyeball and decide if, and who knows what distance they were, but we had it all paced out, and then students, once you'd done that, and they had seen how ludicrous it was, the idea that anyone could be serving essentially life imprisonment for this kind of identification, that was very inspirational to them. Yeah.
First of all, Ryan, I've rarely read a book so quickly. And I got it, and within a week I had it all done. And I think it's enormously complex. I can imagine, I think you told me one time that it's like 20 edits that you went back.
Easily.
I don't know how you have the patience, let
You
alone
know,
the persistence to do what you did, but it's a world-class effort. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just a really world-class effort. And one other thing that didn't come out, but you talked a little bit about this intelligence amongst the legal profession and that they were kind of in the background. I don't know Dick Madsen, but Dick Madsen, I understood from the get-go, said these guys are innocent. This was an immense miscarriage of justice, and he sort of left the profession after that. He certainly became very disillusioned by it. But that's a pretty impressive thing in itself.
He crossed the line a little bit in a favorable way from my perspective when at one point he told me that he tipped me that a guy, Jason Wallace, was in the jail that he thought I needed to talk to. And what Madsen said is that his understanding is that he was either there or knows who was there. And that hadn't, those cases were completely unconnected at that point. And I went to go see Jason Wallace in the jail immediately, and it was the weirdest interview I have ever had at any time. And essentially, he was very hostile and kept asking, "Where'd you get my name?" Didn't deny anything, but just said, "Where'd you get my name?" You know, but Madsen, I think, you know, believed really strongly in their innocence and also might have had other knowledge of, you know,
In the midst of all of this, you and Kate and the kids went off to, I think, Bombay, was it?
Well, okay, this was, there was a point, I spent a year in India, you know, and this was literally, everything had stalled. And we went to India, I think, in 2007 or 8, and you know, I just needed to get, I needed a change of perspective, and Kate was into it, and but also I knew, I was keeping track with all the lawyers, and I knew that nothing was going to happen in this year, you know, and there is another person who I think deserves credit for doing what he could within the limits of the law to urge me to continue working on it. And that's Jeff Wildridge. And he just, whenever I happened to bump into him, he'd kind of give me an attaboy, you know, in a way that I confronted him finally at one point because and he wouldn't go anywhere, but I think knew that he was representing, you know, Jason Wallace, who I think he knew had murdered Hartman, and he was telling me to keep asking questions. And I think that's, I mean, my dad's a lawyer, I know that that's some ethical issues there and such, but he didn't flat out say anything other than giving me attaboys, which seemed pretty odd and intriguing, you know.
We'll take one more question and then, okay, over here.
Yeah, I mean, here we go.
Yeah.
I have more questions. The witness, 500 yards at night, and he was drunk, and the whole case was based on him.
Yeah, Arlo Olson, yeah.
Thank you for doing what you did, and thanks for giving so much credit to the students that helped you.
Well,
You just finished your book. Too many questions, just one.
Yeah,
For all that happened,
yeah.
it was one person who orchestrated this case and in fact convicted these 4 innocent people. You mentioned his name a number of times in the book, but you didn't come out and say it. Maybe there's a reason for it. But one person did this based on prejudice, really. And can you say, will you say who it was? You know who it was. I know who it was because I was on a very similar case with him, and I stopped it.
You know, I'm not sure I know exactly who you're talking about, but I mean, on the prosecutorial side, it's that's their job, you know.
To convict innocent people?
Well, I don't think so. You know, I mean, that's why I would really. I was never in a position where I had a person on the prosecutorial side that was saying anything to mislead me. I don't think. I mean, they were really careful about how far they would go, you know. And I'm not sure who you're talking to. I want to talk to you afterwards, find out who you're talking about.
Well, that's kind of a segue to say, let's thank Brian O'Donoghue and his student for your work.